Hello everyone, and welcome back to Ashes of Creation, everything you need to know. Today, we're focusing on food, and a little bit of tavern information as well. Let's get straight into it. Before we go any further, I should mention this video is going to be primarily of me, as there is no actual images or videos of food in the game yet. Let's go into it. First up, let's talk about taverns. Taverns are a general hub that can be built within a freehold. These give food buffs to players that enter these buildings and choose which buffs they want. There will be a menu selection. As players go and get these buffs at the taverns will get experience and level up. These level ups give increased radius to the area of effect of those taverns, and could potentially also increase the effect that food buffs actually give you as a player. Choosing a perfect freehold location to put a tavern is going to be incredibly important, as leveling up that tavern is entirely involved around players actually using it. So take a lot of thought and consideration when you want to build your tavern as to what players do in that area and where they're going to be. That will be the best way to get it leveled up. Of course, if you're in a large guild, you could always rely on that guild to help you level it up too, but if you have it in a good area with ideal numbers and things to do, you'll be better off, because then your guild will directly get benefited by this tavern location as well. Let's talk about how food is made really quick. So food has to be created from raw materials. These materials can be turned into recipes by combining them together, and you can create new and different foods by combining foods together. There's a lot of combinations here that could be thought of, but I'll go down like a general list of what I think food will be like. I should mention beforehand that different strains of food exist within the world. If you're in one location, you will have, let's say, barley, but if you're in another location, that location might only have wheat or some other strain of grain. These, according to the developers, give different buffs depending on what they are, or they give different benefits. So location for that is also important, as your supply chain to get the materials you need in order to craft food is entirely dependent on the product. So location is incredibly important when it comes to the food that you're making as well, as you will need to be close by to where your ingredients are harvested in order to get them in a timely manner, or else you're not going to be able to upkeep the food that's being used within your tavern. And as we all know, the first thing that will happen when this game opens up with the food, theory crafters will be all over it, creating Google documents to find the absolute best combinations of ingredients. This type of egg goes the best with this type of wheat to give this combination and this effect. It's going to be absolute madness. So keep an eye on this channel, as I will definitely be talking about what the best combos are and what you should be using and looking for. To note as well, other players can bring the food that they make to your tavern to put on your menu. So it won't solely rely on you creating food in order to keep your tavern stocked up for everybody. Now, let's get into food buffs and their effects. I know for sure around a tavern there are going to be effects that, one, will reduce the amount of time required to gather a resource. So you'll mine quicker, you'll gather that herb faster, you'll fish a little bit quicker, or have bonus damage to fish when you're doing larger fishing. On top of that, I believe there will also be increased loot on enemy kills. So if you're farming an area, you're going to want to be near a tavern that gives more loot for kills, as that'll be the best way to farm certain items or certain gold or whatever you need in that area. They've mentioned a couple types of food, namely bacon, baked potatoes, pies, but I want to go over two really quick. They're drinks. So there are a lot of options for drinks in this game, but the two that I want to talk about are tea and coffee. I think tea could give buffs like make you more resistant to sleep effects, or give you increased fire damage somehow. Whereas coffee will likely make you run faster. It'll give you like a move speed buff, so you can get around quicker while gathering, or even increased crowd control duration. I think that would be an interesting one. You're so full of caffeine that you actually hit a little bit harder on your stuns. And while these effects that I'm about to talk about aren't necessarily related to any specific consumable, they all could have a pretty big impact on the game if they exist as food buffs. One effect that could exist is larger area of effect radiuses. So your meteor shower goes from this big to like that big, or your healing circle goes from this big to this big. These are a minor thing that you might not think make a big difference, but if you're farming large packs or you're working with a large group to fight, getting that increased radius could be a huge change. The developers have talked about how crafting and consumables and food buffs will impact the entire game in a heavier way than just a PvP guild will, and that a lot of these players who do specifically just crafting will control a lot of influence over the game. So making food buffs like what I'm about to describe and what I have described would be these huge impactful things that would be really healthy for the crafters and people who just want to cook for a living in their tavern. So let's do a couple obvious ones. Increased stat boosts, extra strength, extra agility, extra healing power, extra intelligence, whatever. This is basic stuff. It'll likely exist, and it'll likely be used in every single type of food. I can expect it to be a combination that you can add to another food that'll give a different type of buff. On top of that, you'll likely find percentage damage increases or percentage healing increases on food. These might also be combinable, but might only be combined with the base stat increases. So if you're looking for just a big stat stick food, that would be a really good option. Say if you're a damage dealer, you'd want straight strength and then a 10% damage boost. Boom, you're out there doing heavy hits. You might not need that increased AoE radius. Of course, I've talked about longer CC duration, that being caffeine with an increased stun, but what if it's a type of eel? Let's say you craft an eel type food, and that eel food increases the stun duration on your lightning skills as a mage. Really specific, but if the crafting system for food is as in-depth as they describe, that could easily be something that's made from the food. Very niche food options for different types of players and what you want to do. There will likely be food buffs from certain types of fish that will give you increased swim speed or a longer lasting breath underwater. All benefits that might not be super useful unless your tavern is only in a certain area, like on the coast. But if you consider the potential of certain underwater gathering zones or mobs to farm in an underwater area, if there's a high enough level tavern that someone thought of ahead of time to put there next to those water zones and then grew its radius to encompass it, those buffs would be super important and would make it a real hotspot real fast. Among other specific things with healers and support classes in general, there might be a food that increases your buff duration as a bard by a certain percentage to help keep higher uptimes on your buffs that you're using on your allies. Or possibly even as a cleric, you have a food that gives you increased heal over time damage, and then you convert your entire spec to also be heal over time. The potential to make food that fills the specific niche that you've created for your own build is really high. And if it's done right, there won't be one or two meta foods to use for each type of archetype or spec, and there will be a lot of different options based on what you want to play. For the health of this game, I hope I'm right. I hope that the crafting system for food is this in-depth. From what they've explained, it sounds like it actually is. So we'll have to get into Alpha 2 and figure that out for sure. Even possibly Alpha 1, if food is implemented by then. I almost forgot to mention, actually, I'm curious if on your boats they'll be customizable to the point where you'll have a small tavern on your boat that you can activate food buffs on. That could give types of naval foods, possibly. What about increased cannon damage? You turn your sails faster as a player. You reload your cannons faster. You repair your ship faster. I think a small tavern on a boat would be pretty important if food buffs specifically are only based around taverns and aren't something you can carry with you in the world on top of that. The only times food has been mentioned is in regards to taverns and the AoE buff involved with those foods. This creates the possibility that food buffs are actually only usable around taverns, and then you can only choose the food that's in those taverns. There might not actually be food you can keep in your inventory and just eat whenever. Of course, I think there will be a bit of both, as it wouldn't necessarily make sense to not have a food buff if you're going out in some desolate area that's really not occupied by anything. It doesn't have any freeholds. You don't have a tavern there, you're specifically getting gimped. There should at least be small food buffs available that aren't as powerful as the tavern food buffs to help give you that extra boost if you're farming mobs that are a little bit higher level than you. And with that, that's really all we know about food. It's something that hasn't been fleshed out within the game at all, and we only know little snippets of. So basically all of this video was speculation, just giving a few general guidelines on what food was. But thank you for watching anyways, and when food comes out, I'll definitely let you know what I think is going to be the most powerful within Ashes of Creation. If there are any topics that you would like me specifically to talk about and speculate on, please, in the comments of this video, leave them. I will try and get to as many things as possible. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you next video. Have a great day.